Welcome to my next video in the Steps Method concept series. Today I'm going to discuss pinning. So before I go into the different themes of pinning, let's just go back to the search and solving strategy, how to find the best move and a plan. So there were three things we distinguished. First, orientation, what has changed in the position, what does my opponent want to do. Then direct threats, what are the tactical characteristics. I will skip positional aspects. Then calculation and then verification. So how does it tie into pinning? So you see on the left side, I call this the blue sheet, the orientation elements. And highlighted in the red boxes are elements related to pinning. So in the orientation, if we can find pieces on one file, rank or diagonal, we should check if there's a tactical theme related to pinning in the position. If we already have established a pin and there's a pinned piece, we can attack it once more, or we can exploit a pinned piece because a pinned piece is a poor defender. And I think there's a lot of strength in orientation. So chess is not only about finding the right move, but also starting with asking yourself the right question. So in the concept of pinning, there are three roles: the pinning piece, the front piece, and the back piece. And for a pin to work properly, the value of the target, the back piece, should be higher than that of the front piece. Because otherwise the front piece might just move away and, for instance, protect the back piece. And just to clarify, when we talk about a back piece, of course, it's a back target. So it can be the king, it can be a piece, or it can be a mating square. So in all three, we are talking about targets when it comes to front piece and back piece. And then the themes. So we saw the first one is create a pin, when there are two pieces on one line. The second is attacking the pinned piece once more. And then the third one is the one that's most often overlooked, and that's exploit that the pinned piece is a poor defender. So the first two, create the pin and attack the pinned piece once more, they target a material gain. The third one is exploiting that the function of the pinned piece is very limited. So normally it's like, is there a pinned piece? What is the pinned piece defending in terms of squares or in terms of other pieces? And is it beneficial to attack that a piece that is defended by the pinned piece, or to go to a square that seems unavailable but is available because of the pinned piece. So the third one is very crucial. Let me now switch to chess. And here we see the first diagram. And if we look at this diagram, of course, when you would start the orientation, a lot of players would say, okay, let me see. Two kings are in the middle. The pawn structure of black on the king side has been damaged. b7 is undefended. g7 is undefended. And then they start thinking, perhaps I should complete my development and play something like rook c1, or attack the pawn on b7 like queen b3. So here it is, if you would ask yourself in the orientation the question, which two pieces are on one line, then immediately my students would answer the bishop on f5 and the queen on a5 are on one line. Then the follow-up question is, okay, the tactical theme related to that characteristic is, can you create a pin? And then, of course, you immediately see that rook h5 creates a pin with the threat of g4 or e4, attack it once more. And now we have to verify if there is a way for black to unpin. Well, if the queen could go to d7, that would be a way to unpin, but that's not the case. And there's also not a way for a very powerful counterattack like queen b4, because in that case we just take the bishop on f5 and that's not sufficient. So it's a simple concept, but it is very critical to do the orientation right, to find them at all times. So if we look to the next situation here, of course there is already a pin in the position, so you could say, okay, I identified there is a pin. And now we go to the second theme, attack the pinned piece one more time. Can we attack the pawn on c6? And yes, we can. We can attack it once more by playing the move queen d5, right? And also this highlights that a pinned piece is a poor defender. So the pawn on c6 is not defending the square on d5 because of the absolute pin of the bishop on a4 to the king on e8. What is the best defense? We verify by black. Black can defend the pawn on c6 with knight e7. What will white play now? White will take the pawn. And so white gained a pawn and still has a lot of initiative. Black's king is in the middle, and white is actually winning in this position. So let's look at this position and let's do the orientation. So a lot of players would say, okay, I see a rook here, the king looks vulnerable. If I could go to the back rank it would be mate, but at the moment that's all being protected by black. The black queen on e5 has a central defending task to the knight on e5, so has no freedom to move. But from a pinning perspective, you could say which two pieces are on one line. And if you ask yourself that question, then you could come to the conclusion that the queen and the king are on one line. Can I exploit that? Well, I cannot play bishop c4 immediately because that square is twice covered by the knight on e5 and the queen on d5. But I can prepare it with bishop d1. And now the threat of playing bishop b3 is so strong that white is immediately winning. And of course this is a backward no move with the bishop. I think you are able to find it if you apply the process and say which two pieces are on one line, and then how can I create a pin. And after you verify that c4 is not available, you say b3 is available, and then you establish the route to b3. So let's look at this position and pause the video and say, what would you play? And I think a lot of players would say, you know, I'm going to play rook e7 here, with the idea to chase the queen away, and after the queen moves I'm going to play queen h6 and threaten mate on h7. But we have to really, in this case, think about all the defensive resources of black, and after rook e7 black could play rook e8, give up the queen, but instead black gets two rooks and is actually safe. So it's always important to verify. And in this position, a lot of players would overlook that the pawn on g6 is actually one time under attack by the queen on g5 and one time defended by the queen on f7. And so it's as if it's an undefended piece, but it's like two such heavy pieces that you would almost not consider it undefended, but the power balance is 0. So we can attack it one more time, like with rook e6. And after rook e6, black cannot allow the pawn to be taken, because that would run into material losses or mate. But after the king protects, now we pin the queen to the king. So this was an example of a preparatory move. We lured the king to g7, and the king is the back piece with a higher value than the queen, and that made the pin possible. Let's look at this position. Right, at the moment there is no pin in the position. Knight d5 is a double attack on the knight on e7, and rook takes d3 is the other threat, and after knight takes d5 we play rook takes d3. And in this case we lured the front piece to the pin by playing knight d5, so the knight is the front piece and the rook on d8 is the back piece. So this is a very beautiful position. So rook takes d5 was played. And now have a look for yourself, pause the video for a moment and establish which pins are in the position. Well, the obvious one is of course this one. Right, the pawn on e6 is pinned to the rook on e8. But there's also another pin, right, because if we would move the bishop from d4, then we would take on d5. And then the pawn on e6 could not take back. So there is actually a second pin in the position that is less trivial, and that is the fact that the bishop on d4 is undefended. Now we can attack it once more, the bishop on d4, with several moves. Right? We can play rook e4, c3, or we can play a move like bishop e6. So what is the correct way to attack it once more, and what could be the defense of black? I hope you found it. So after a rook e4, black has bishop e5, and now the rook is under attack, and black doesn't have time to attack it once more. The same after c3, we can play bishop e5. The bishop cannot go to c3 after rook takes d5, c takes d5, so cannot attack the bishop on e5 one more time. So the correct way to attack the bishop is with bishop e6. So in this case again, orientation was very important, to see that there was not just one pin, but there were two pins in the position, and then to use the theme of attack it one more time. Same in this case. So what is the pin that is in the position? Well, from white is to move. A lot of players would not realize that actually this is a pin, and that the rook on c4 can not move, because then black would lose the queen. Of course we see an undefended rook on d5, so we attack it, and it's clear that of course king f7 fails to f5. But bishop c4, an x-ray defense of the rook, fails to the fact that the rook on c2 is a poor defender, so we just take it and then we win a piece. Okay, so in this case, and I said when I was discussing a pinned piece is a poor defender, can you find actually in this position what the pinned piece is? Right? So if the pawn on f3 would not be there, what would white play? If the pawn would not be there, rook h1 is checkmate. So actually the bishop on b7 is pinning the pawn on f3 to the square, right? A target, a mating square, h1. And this means that we now ask the question, what is the pawn on f3 defending? The pawn on f3 is defending the squares e4 and g4. And at first glance they might seem not to be available, but now we see, after we have identified that this pin exists in the position, we can play queen g4, and black is immediately winning, threatening queen g3 checkmate and threatening to take on h4. Okay, let me close out with this one. So take a moment to see if you find any pins. So in this case, Etienne Bacrot played queen h4. The knight was attacking the queen on g5. The knight And where is the pin? Well, white has a pin to the pawn on g7, so white is pinning the pawn on e5 to the pawn on e7 with a mating threat. What is the pawn on e5 defending? The pawn on e5 is defending the squares f4 and d4. So this makes it possible, in this case, to play the move rook d4, pinning the bishop to the queen. And there is, of course, already one attacker, the bishop on e2. And after h5, we attack it once more, and we win the bishop on g4. So this would have been a way to immediately win the game. So looking at the third theme, exploit pinned piece as a poor defender, you can see you have to be very good in your orientation of identifying which pin is in the position and then seeing which function of the pinned piece has been diminished. In the previous diagram we saw that g4 was undefended. In this diagram we see that the square f4 is actually undefended, although it looks that the pawn on e5 is covering it. So it's a diminished function and it's not going for immediate material gain. Yes, so let me close out with the following. The fact that pinning a pin is really a vulnerability stood out, of course, in the last World Championships. This is Magnus Carlsen tweeting about Ding winning the World Championship with the move rook g6, self-pinning. And it looks very dangerous. Everyone expected there a repeat of moves and playoffs. But by playing this daring move, Ding won the World Championships because Nepo tried to get h4, h5 in, was unsuccessful, and then the pawns on the queen side decided the game. And this is just to show what a vulnerability pinning can create. I appreciate you watching the video and have a nice day.